Okay, before I get started with my review, I would just like to state right now that my review is focusing strictly on the Resident Evil game itself. It is not going into any detail whatsoever about the Resident Evil Resistance multiplayer game that comes with the game. So with that said, let's jump right into my review. Last year, Capcom released the Resident Evil 2 remake, which was a rather interesting experience. Since I was never really much of a fan of the original gameplay style of the classic Resident Evil games, this was my opportunity to try out the classic title in a much more updated form. And while I personally really disliked the first third of that game, once the title got going, it ended up being everything I could ask for from a remake title, and was certainly one of the better games I played last year. Jump just a year later, and Capcom has now released the Resident Evil 3 remake, and all I could do is ask myself is that, have Capcom managed to develop another smash hit? And unfortunately, while there is still some good to be found in this remake title, some of the changes that were made have made me feel very unsure on the direction that Capcom will take this franchise. Now, the story for Resident Evil 3 plays out as kind of a prequel to Resident Evil 2 at the beginning, while later events are happening simultaneous to those events. Now, this time you will follow the character of Jill Valentine, who is a member of the Special Forces Unit STARS, who wakes up just as the T-Virus outbreak has started in Raccoon City. Then she finds herself being chased by a creature called the Nemesis that is going around targeting STARS members. Now, while trying to find a way out of the city, Jill crosses paths with Carlos and his unit of mercenaries that have been hired by Umbrella to rescue civilians. Though Jill doesn't trust Carlos at first, she recognizes that in order to escape the city, they will have to work together. But in the process, they find out some secrets about Umbrella while being hunted by the Nemesis, who seems to be nearly unstoppable. Now, I'm going to get the biggest universal criticism out of the way first. Now, this story is not very deep, and the characters aren't really given much in terms of development because this game is criminally short, which is disappointing when you take into account just how much content Capcom removed from the original game. And if you go back even further to the original game and how much shorter that game was compared to the original Resident Evil 2 game. It just feels that Capcom really should have taken this opportunity to not so much change the original telling of Resident Evil 3, but perhaps expand upon it. Looking back at last year's Resident Evil 2 remake, not only were their individual campaigns longer, but the fact that you had two of them gave you far more playtime than Resident Evil 3's remake. Though you have two characters that you play as during this campaign, it's told in a much more linear style, which just has you transitioning between the two characters at different times. And there are a number of serious time jumps that show one character needing to get from one location to another, and I was just thinking that there were moments that they really could have worked in and added a good 15 or 20 minute section of gameplay showing that character actually getting to that location. Anything to stretch out the playtime would have really benefited this game. Now, I did appreciate the moments that either showed characters that we encountered in Resident Evil 2 or answered a few questions that were brought up in last year's game. Now, when it comes to Resident Evil 3 Remake's gameplay, it is completely identical to last year's game. So for anyone who has played the Resident Evil 2 remake, you're going to be able to easily jump in and get used to everything. The only new gameplay mechanic that they added is a dodge function for Jill and a counter function for Carlos. When you're about to get hit or grabbed, if you manage to time it just right, not only will you evade the attack, but have a chance to have time slow down and give you a free shot at an enemy's weak point. Now, what's really surprising to me is how, unlike the Resident Evil 2 remake, which I openly have stated many times that I really did not like the first third of that game that focused on the police station, the first third of this game is undoubtedly the best. Right when the outbreak starts, and right when you're encountering the Nemesis for the first time, that entire section is the most suspenseful. The atmosphere feels completely different to how it was in the Resident Evil 2 remake, and just seeing everything falling apart as the number of zombies is increasing adds a level of terror that really wasn't present in Resident Evil 2. And I must say that there is this spider-like nest section where you have to go around turning on generators while these spider-like creatures are stalking you. It is easily one of the best sequences in a Resident Evil game that I've ever experienced. But I have to say, once you've passed that first third, the entire tone of the game changes and it becomes much more fast action paced, especially when you're playing as Carlos. The fact that his primary weapon is an automatic weapon means that the game throws a lot more enemies at you at one time. Now, the locations do vary, and there are certainly a solid collection of familiar enemy types that you will encounter, but shockingly, the most disappointing enemy in the game is the Nemesis. Now, even though I didn't like the first third of the Resident Evil 2 remake and never really played the original Resident Evil 3 game outside of needing to use it for a video that I did research on a number of years back, I at least admired and respect the idea of a powerful enemy that was actively hunting you in a confined area in Mr. X's case, or an enemy that is constantly hunting you throughout the game in Nemesis' case in the original game. But sadly, that has been completely removed here because all of Nemesis' scenes are now scripted, and that's kind of disappointing that the game that is a remake of a game that the main antagonist's name is on the front cover appears so little in this game. And even all of Nemesis' boss fights in this game are unbelievably easy. And that cannot be because I chose to play this game on normal difficulty, because the actual structure of these boss fights themselves was too straightforward. And this was not only the shortest Resident Evil game I've ever played, but all of Nemesis' boss fights were the easiest boss fights that I've ever experienced in a Resident Evil game. And in my opinion, unless you're a trophy hunter or a completionist, there is not much replay value. Because of how short this game is, any replay value is based solely on the chance of collecting either bonus content in the form of artwork or figures, or completing point objectives and wanting to test out some new weapons that you have purchased for your bonus points. Now, despite my criticism towards this game, there is still a lot to like about it when you're actually in the moment playing this game. It is just as enjoyable as it was last year, and visually, this game is absolutely stunning. That part cannot be denied. But I just feel like this game is simply piggybacking off of all of the progress that the Resident Evil 2 remake made, and due to all of its flaws, the Resident Evil 3 remake kind of feels it trying to find an identity of its own, which ultimately made this remake's experience rather underwhelming for me. Okay, now despite the fact that my review so far has sounded kind of negative, I do not think in any way, sense, of the form that this is a bad game. It's just heavily flawed. I mean, you've got a campaign that is just painfully short for any amount of difficulty. You've got characters they don't do much with. You've got some of the easiest boss fights. They completely strip Nemesis down to being really just not all that intimidating at all. And when you look at this game in its entirety, it just does not feel like a full game. This easily could have been a DLC for Resident Evil 2. It's so closely tied to Resident Evil 2 that you were reminded of it. And I'm not comparing it to its predecessor in terms of the original version, because I never played the original version. This isn't like Resident Evil 2, where I actually played Resident Evil 2, the original version, hated it, and then got a new version that I was actually introduced to and actually ended up enjoying it. I'm comparing it to Resident Evil 2, and when you compare this game to Resident Evil 2, then there's just no denying that there was just never even close to enough content to warrant a $60 price tag. And the fact that I was forced to pay $60 just to play this game kind of pisses me off. Now, I'm not knocking anyone who enjoys this game. I know there's a bunch of people out there that really do enjoy this game and are having a blast with it. But when I hear people telling me that, heck, in order for me to enjoy this game, I should be playing this game on hard difficulty because I played it on standard difficulty, is kind of a ridiculous defense. No offense to any of my friends out there, because I did not do anything more or less with this game than I would have done when I was playing any other Resident Evil game. I play the game on standard difficulty, then once I've beat it and know what to do and know where to find things, and I'm not wasting time looking around or backtracking, then I would go back and play it on hard difficulty. But heck, there's just not enough of a reason for me to want to go back and play this a second time. And this kind of puts me in a really kind of cautious mood right now, because if these are the same people that are going to be supposedly working on a Resident Evil 4 remake, I'm kind of scared right now. I mean, if they're going to take a game that didn't even have as much content to begin with in the original version and strip it down and take so much of it out, I don't even want to know what they're going to do with Resident Evil 4. They're going to butcher the hell out of that game. So as it stands right now, I'm kind of in just an odd moment right now with Capcom. Now, if I had to give Resident Evil 3 Remake a rating, not a bad game, not a great game, probably not something I'm proud to add to my collection of games because I know what a $6 game feels like, I have to give Resident Evil 3 Remake a 6.5 out of 10. I think if this game had been at least another 4 hours long, and maybe if they'd had some extra gameplay modes, I probably would have bumped it up to at least a 7.5, which is not bad when you take into effect that I gave Resident Evil 2 Remake an 8. So that is my review for Resident Evil 3 Remake. So now that you've heard my review, if you happen to play this game, please share your thoughts with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And if you happen to like this review, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a thumbs up and press the subscribe button to help grow the channel, because every subscription really does count. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.